So it's 10 o'clock, but I think maybe we might want to wait just one more minute and see if anybody else wants to join before we get started. And while we are waiting, if everybody here could check in the chat, just go ahead and type your name, email address, campus, and role in the chat. That'll help us take attendance. Good morning, welcome everybody. Just taking a moment to check in the chat by typing in our name, email address, campus, and role. Okay, it's 10:02, so I'll just go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. If you haven't yet, and sorry for the repetition if you've been here already, just want to go ahead and invite you to check in the chat and type in your name, email address, campus, and role. We have just 1 hour today together, which is not a lot of time to address equity in an online space. So we're really just taking the time to check in with each other and to get centered and to be in community. And I'm Nika Hogan, and I'm just going to go through a couple of introductory slides to orient folks if this is your first Zoom with 3CSN. And then my colleague Lauren Service will also be facilitating with us today. So let's see if I can move this slide. I have so many windows open. I know everybody feels my pain. There we go. So thank you so much for joining us. And our objectives today is to be in community with one another, which is really important for our students, and it's really important for us as well. We are continuing to try to support our professional identity. We have an opportunity here to learn new things and to go outside of the box. Also to nurture all of the practices that we've been trying to support in ourselves and others up to this point. And for the 3CSN network as a whole, when we engage in dialogue with you, we learn what people's inquiry questions are and needs are, and it gives us more insight for what to offer coming up. And we are always doing that, but obviously in this rapidly changing world and environment, it's even more important. So just quick FYI, 3CSN's theory of change, who we are as a network and how we operate. We try to provide professional learning opportunities about how networking works, and also how we can research what we're doing as we do it, so action research methodologies. And when we do that, we try to work ourselves as college professionals and support others to transform their environments and identities. So we try to work in communities of practice and produce powerful learning and working across campuses. So that's exactly what we're still trying to do, even in this remote environment. And that leads us to today's session. So Lauren and I just want to be thinking in this series about being equitable in online spaces. How can we be truly community responsive? How can we find a minute in all of this work to actually center in what matters most in terms of creating more equitable ecosystems? So we don't have time for a whole lot, We'll talk a little bit about how to be in community together in this moment in time right now. We'll do a little bit of reading and knowledge building, and we'll have some conversation. So there are some community agreements that are sort of well established for those of us who spend a lot of time on Zoom, which is now everyone, even our kids. And so it's a very Zoomy world now. My son does Taekwondo on Zoom now. Who knew? But these are some of the things, you know, we can raise our hand digitally, or we can use the chat to ask a question. Everybody's got themselves on mute because we all know that our dogs bark and our kids scream and things like that. And so when we want to talk, we need to remember to unmute. We can try to speak and describe and give chat words, not just use the video, because not everybody's video works all the time. We can be patient with each other because we're all doing our best. We can try to keep it simple, even though we'd love to be rock stars and, you know, create a 1 hour Zoom that would really like give everybody a very clear sense of what to do next. In truth, we're just trying to figure it out as best we can. So we'll keep it simple and we'll be okay with that. So we are going to ask to see if there's anything that we want to add, but before we do that, we'll layer on this text, and this is called an invitation to brave space. And Lauren has just posted in the chat a link to a Google Doc that we can use to take notes. And so if this is hard to see, or if you can't see the slide, then you can go ahead and click the link in the chat and get to the Google Doc, and there's a link to this text, an invitation to brave space. Let me give you 1 minute just to read over this, and then let's have a conversation about anything we want to add to those community agreements that have already been outlined. Set my timer for 1 minute so you can read. Take about 10 more seconds. So what I want to invite now is your comments or your questions about this idea of brave space. I want to invite you to either raise your hand or type into the chat so that we can have this quick conversation. And Lauren, do we want people to type into the chat or into the Google Doc? Now I'm confused.
I think they could do either.
Either one, yeah.
Yeah.
It all works. We'll try to capture it all together in the end, but I'll just wait for comments, questions. If there's a line in here that you'd like to amplify, and just type it again so that it comes forward, or if there's something you want to question, let's have that conversation now. Alina's raised her hand.
Yeah, I just think it's very powerful. You know, Brene Brown puts out something similar to this as well. And I think that we can all benefit from adopting this into our lives, but also sharing it with our students as well as people that we work with. So I really appreciate you sharing this. I think it puts us into a very mindful place. And I think it's good for our mental health. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Alina. I'm just curious if there's one part that resonates the most or reminds you the most of Brene Brown's work.
I would say creating the brave space itself. And, you know, indicating that we're not going to be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but doing the best that we can, and not being afraid, being brave enough to do that. So
Thank you. Yes,
sure.
thank you so much. It's a nice, Brene Brown is a nice connection. I really appreciate the way that she talks about having the courage to be vulnerable, and that's kind of like this secret power that you can have actually to be an amazing leader. But it goes against the grain of culturally, we are sort of taught to be strong and not to be vulnerable, but that leads to not coming from an authentic place, which then limits the power and the leadership. So, but yeah, to be yourself and to be vulnerable and to put yourself out there, it does need us to be courageous. I'm just reading from the chat. What's resonating with me this morning, we all have the right to start somewhere, especially with technology. That really does resonate, doesn't it? And I appreciate calling each other to more truth and love without needing it to be perfect. I also really appreciate that. I love that we will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. I feel like that's really helpful. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds, acknowledging past experiences. I also appreciate that too. Any other words or questions about the invitation to Brave Space?
So this is Alina. I was just wondering if this is going to be emailed to us.
Well, you've got the link to the Google Doc that's in the chat. Oh, that Lauren just resent it and needed to change the editing features. So you've got that, and there's a link to this document in there.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that with this kind of really generous and open norm that we're setting, that we're just, it doesn't have to be perfect and it's not going to be, but we have a right to start somewhere, and that's where we're going to start. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen just to make it easier for all of us to use the Google Doc resource and to do some knowledge building together.
So good morning, everyone. Really excited to be here with all of you to be thinking about how are we going to really put equity at the center of the work that we're doing, particularly at a time when we are completely stressed and, you know, all of this work that we're needing to do, and trying to hold our students and our colleagues and our loved ones with some care and love at the same time. So last week, like Nika was saying, we asked the question of how can we be community responsive in this moment? And so we thought to kind of add to that conversation, this week we would ask the question of, you know, could this be a moment for us to pivot and to really think about what's most important in our classes? And then also, how do we surface that need to continue finding our way to equity at a time where we are reactive, where we're living through social distancing, and we're experiencing all this pressure to sort of have status quo, right? What we had in our face-to-face sections, all of a sudden now are going to be there in our online environments. And, you know, I was telling Nika this morning that I just read this great article, and if I can find it, I'll put it in our chat. But it was from a School of Ed dean who's talking about, you know, are we missing a moment here? And could this be an opportunity for us to think about things like creativity as opposed to just the rush to online? And so Nika and I thought we would read something a little different this time, not quite equity focused, But most definitely, I think community focused and community responsive. And you may have seen it, it was in the Chronicle. And it was the article, why you shouldn't ignore all that coronavirus inspired productivity pressure. And what I'm gonna do is, it's in our shared document, but I'll also add it to our chat. We're gonna spend about 7 minutes. And if we could read it, and read it the way you would normally read it. So if you like to highlight online. We'll also ask you to think about, are there any strong lines? So lines that really are powerful, they resonate with you. Maybe you're asking like, I don't know what to do with this, or I hate it, I love it. But also think about questions that you might have. So if we could just spend our 7 minutes reading, and then I'll give us about a 30-second warning, and then we'll come back together. So if in the next 30 seconds you can find a comfortable place to stop and come back together. Okay, so in a minute, we're gonna send you to breakout rooms, and you'll get a chance to have some conversation with folks, to share your questions and your strong lines. And I wanted to explain a little bit, one of the metaphors that Nika and I have really been working through this year, and that's the metaphor of wayfinding. So a lot of times with equity, we think of it as this fixed point, right? We just have to sort of set our navigational direction, and we're just gonna get there, and we have achieved equity. And instead, we've really been exploring this idea of wayfinding, right? And how do we read the stars, the winds, the moon, and how do we call upon multiple things, right? And in order to help us find our way, and also understanding that equity is something that that is ongoing, right? That it's something that we're always building knowledge, building relationships, engaging in reflection in order to achieve. And here is this sort of space, right, where we have been thrown into some chaos. And so again, we're thinking about, how does this impact our ability to find our way to equity, particularly when we are in a space of just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of reactivity. And so what we're hoping we can do is sort of take sort of a step back to really think about, well, what matters, right? And in the work that we do with students, and from the multiple vantage points, right, in which we work with them, really thinking about, how does what's happening right now, how should we be responding to it? How should that be impacting our work? And so you're going to get an invite to join a breakout room, where you're going to get to have some conversation in trios, just to work through questions, strong lines. So welcome back, everyone. So we wanted to open up to a bigger group conversation, but before we do that, we also want to invite you to come back to our shared document, because we know that some of us are going to be comfortable chiming in, but we also may just want to add some of our ideas to our shared document. So if we could think about, what were some of the strong lines that we might want to bring up with the whole group, but also thinking about how we apply this into the work that we're doing with students. So if we could just take a quick minute. So I know many of us are still typing our strong lines and our questions, but I want to invite and open it up to see if we want to start responding. And we can respond verbally. We can also start responding directly in our document. So whatever feels more comfortable for you. Because I think for us, this big question now is not just for our own personal practice, right? But also in working with our colleagues, it's thinking about, how do we respond to this, right? How should we be doing this work with students and with our colleagues on behalf of learning? So we'll open it up. Questions, responses, either verbally or within the document.
Go ahead,
Go ahead,
Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we had a really nice conversation in the breakout room about, just the rush to normalcy, the rush to productivity, how, yeah, that's actually this form of denial of, of if not our own, I mean, I think it probably would be that too, but then at least of other people's, of actually what's happening for our students, for our colleagues, for someone else. And that if I just stick with my agenda, and that's really the opposite of culturally responsive teaching of like, am I just sticking with what I think my reality is and the content and agenda I have, or am I actually listening to the needs, to the people in the room? Yeah, that really struck me.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Any other responses or questions that came up for you? One of my questions has been, I love the notion of normalcy that she really talks about in here, but it also got me thinking about that maybe it's been sort of a false sense of normalcy all along, right? That I think a lot of what we're noticing right now, who has access to internet, who has computers at home, who has, basic needs being provided, like food and housing, all of these things all of a sudden are like, we're asking these questions that some of us have been asking all along, but I think all of us are feeling it right now, right? And yeah, I think this question of like, how do we in this moment respond to the glaring inequities that we're seeing, but also when we do go back to normal, whatever that is, how will we be different and changed for it, right? Or are we just going to go back to the way it was?
I've just posted into the chat an article from the New York Times that speaks to what you were just bringing up, Lauren, just for later.
Awesome.
It's nothing
Thanks,
that we
Anna.
don't already know, but it's really extreme. So it just seems like there is an opportunity here to actually notice the Hunger Games reality that we live in.
Yeah.
I think somebody else unmuted at the same time as me.
I'm noticing a lot of synergy around like this idea of like focusing on the authentic, and this idea too around like synergy around like how do we be gentle with students. And I'd really love for us to chat a little bit around like what are some of the things that you're doing to do that.
So I'll jump in, Lauren, to tag on that.
Thanks, Inga.
One of the things I've noticed I'm doing is offering a lot more options and choice with assignments. Like I just revised an assignment that I've been doing for years in my class, thinking this is just such a successful assignment, and I totally revamped it. And now there's just like 4 different paths they can go down and all these options. And because I'm thinking, they don't have access to what they normally had access to.
Yeah.
So there were some parts that really did need to be revised. I think, why don't I do this all the time? So I think for me, it looks like option, more choice. And if I'm thinking it's going to work now, then, I need to get out of that. Like, this isn't just crisis teaching. This should just be teaching. I should always offer option and choice, because many people are in crisis. you know, we're all sharing this one, but many of my students have crises all the time that I might not know about.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about.
Thanks, Inga. Is anyone else noticing that the changes that you're making and maybe some of the decisions behind why you're doing it?
I was just gonna, yeah. First of all, I just wanted to thank you so much, Inga, for saying that. That was just, it resonated so much of just, yeah, like how do we let this, yeah, how do we not lose the moment of learning how to be a better teacher through this? And that was just so beautifully reflected. And I found, you know, it's interesting. We were doing some work around Parker Palmer this year in equity, and he's become such a beacon for me. And there's something in there. He talks so much about trusting ourselves as teachers, and I found this took that for me, where I had to just really trust my sense of what students needed and what was happening, and no one, you know, and there was this like I was in this uncomfortable place of not knowing how to do it, so I had to just like trust my values of care for students. And one change I'm making is it is sort of like what you were just saying, Inga, of so much more flexibility and just how do students, I'm meeting with them more. Like I'm doing, even it was our spring break last week, and I still just do one-on-ones all week with students. I feel like they need me to actually talk and find out how to help them. So I feel like I'm being even more one-on-one conferencing with students through this.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. That to me also raises another question that maybe we could chat about, and which is that we're also a part of, like, just like there's care and concern and flexibility that we want to give to our students, what about for ourselves? And I'm wondering, how are you also managing, right? Because part of this productivity push, and I mean, in ordinary times, right? If someone were to come to you and say, we're going to do all of this work, you'd say, where's my additional pay? Where's all of this things, right? That's going to allow me to do this. And yet here we are, right? Overnight, people have converted, right? And it's not coming with extra pay. It's certainly not coming with extra time. And so how are we also being mindful of our own selves, flexibility and care in the work that we're designing with students, right? Because we're not designing for them, we're designing for all of us.
So I personally am trying to be a lot more forgiving and understanding. So I tend to be like quite a perfectionist when it comes to my teaching. Like I want it to be the best possible experience for my students all the time. And in this situation, I've had to accept it's going to be what it is. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to, you know, I'll do the best that I can for them. But it's okay if, you know, I don't get all these like videos recorded for them. It's okay if I'm not capable of creating the exact same lab experience at home that they would normally have if they were with me. And so I'm actually, you know, spending a lot more time like being okay with things not being perfect. And also with my students, I'm spending a lot more time reinforcing the community building that we did in the classroom during the first half of the semester. That I'm a big proponent of spending a lot of time at the beginning of the semester building community within the classroom, that students will get to know each other and have resources to reach out and ask for help from their peers. Because, you know, there's only one of me and there's, you know, 60 to 100 of them. And so I've been finding that I actually don't do a lot of, you know, Zoom lectures with my students. Instead, we spend that time kind of reinforcing our community and just checking in with each other and making sure that everyone's okay.
So it sounds like what you're describing, Jennifer, is contact over content. So it's the quality of the contact that we have with each other that's ultimately going to influence the learning more so than the cover, than your words touching every bit of content that you would normally.
Yes, yes. And I mean, that's also something I've been working on in my teaching, in the past couple of years anyways, was this concept that I don't have to explicitly say everything to the student for them to get the content. There's other ways for them to get the content and learn that it's, me standing up in front of a student and just lecturing at them and delivering content doesn't mean that they actually learn the content. And so there's more useful things that I can do to help them learn the content on their own time, in their own way. And so I'm more there as a facilitator for their community, for their learning group.
Yeah. And Jennifer, I think it'll be beautiful for you and all of us to think about how this experience changes us. And when we go back to the classroom or whatever methods we used before, like, will we employ those old things, or will we come back and continue to do what we're doing now? And I don't know your name, but anonymous iguana right now is posting, and you gotta love Google Docs, right? And there's this great comment in here, right, about how the best way to improve teaching is through mistakes, right? What feels good for teachers and students, and then and Iguana goes on to talk about how we're eliminating the peer pressure. But I think that's also connected to what Jennifer was talking about, in that, can we look at this opportunity as like this big learning lab for us, right? Where we can try out some new things, we can make some mistakes. But I don't know though, because I know that I've got a lot of colleagues who, in this moment of feeling so much pressure and so much stress, and at the same time having to convert to online teaching and feeling the pressure, wanting to do so well for students, like, how do we kind of take one step back and say, no, we're going to learn here and it's okay, and we're going to make mistakes. But I don't know, those are kind of hard things, I think, for us, because they're so sort of ingrained in our system that we need to be perfect, right? Even though we don't want to be the sage on the stage, there is still that expectation that we're going to be sagely, right? And that we're going to be these experts. Any other questions or strong lines that we can talk about?
I just wanted to amplify in the Google Doc, Rebecca, let me find it again. Everything's moving. Pulled out from the article, focus on real internal change. These human transformations will be honest, raw, ugly, hopeful, frustrated, beautiful, and divine. And that sounded to me like equity work. So I do think that there is some kind of a synergy here to the work that we're trying to do. Not so much necessarily being aided by this crisis, but it's like everything else, the clarity of the need to do that work right now. And Rebecca's got her hand up. Go ahead and unmute, Rebecca. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it also reminds me of the conversation that we had in the breakout room. One of our participants in this group was talking about her context, that she works with those who don't have sight, and the experience of the people who are moving around the world with that reality, and how, you usually touch things to figure out what's around you, and you don't know exactly how far you are from other people. And so, it's like, I think there's this opportunity for us to work with each other to understand the assumptions that we're operating with. And, these encounters give us that opportunity, in a lot of ways, and in our classroom, to kind of see new things and go, oh, wow, I didn't I didn't see that that was happening, or because for example, one of her students really has had a hard time out in public. People are afraid and responding in ways that are a little aggressive and not so welcoming. So, so yeah, I mean, I think we have the chance to see some of that in ways that maybe we didn't think about that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
We are almost out of time. So I'm gonna just draw your attention to two things. One is that at the bottom of our Google Doc, there's a little table for you to give us some feedback. It's just very simple, gots and needs. Like today I got, and I still need, or I have questions about. And then I also will just share, there are more Zooms like this that are just a 1 hour chance to connect on various topics. Some of them are more content focused, I think, and others like this one are more just connect and do a little bit of reading or exploring of a topic and be in community. This Padlet, if you haven't checked it out, has a million gajillion resources on it that have to do with navigating right now. And then also in this series, we're just inviting partners and friends of 3CSN, anyone and everyone, and that means you too. A lot of times people have developed Zooms to help their colleagues and they've already kind of got it ready, and please, offer it as well in the 3CSN network, because there are thousands and thousands of practitioners who are looking for this kind of connection and community and just the brilliance that's floating around out there. No pressure, not like we all need more Zooms in our lives, but the invitation is there to lead a session or to check out who all is leading sessions. And we really just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here and to support one another. And I'm going to stop the share. And are there any last questions or comments, or does anybody need help finding the place to give us feedback on the Google Doc? I can actually show that one in my screen as well. So
it's like, I believe we have an opportunity right now to change the outcome of education for the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this is coming from a student.
Did you want to say more?
Well, I mean, I could do a speech, but unless anybody really commits to it, then it's like many of you have questioned, will we go back to the same? It's like, if we leave this under the hands of people that are already in charge, it will go back to the same, and because imagine we've had an education for years now, and it's always been the same. I still use the same textbook. They're still learning. My brother, there's a 10-year difference between me and my brother, and he is still learning what I was learning. And there's no point of having a book every year with a different edition, because they're not changing the information. All they're doing is finding material for it to be relatable. It's like, why don't I ever see, this is where one, like a form of ingenuity could come into play, where you could read a book and it's timeless, where you could pick it up at any point in time and still it could be relevant and it could be understood.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. We really appreciate it, and we will take it to heart. And unfortunately, I think have to end this right now, because there might be another Zoom that's trying to start because this is our reality. So thank you so much. I see lots of people typing into the feedback, and thank you for joining us. And any questions or concerns, you can write to info@3csn.org. Any last words, Lauren?
No, just thank you all for being here And I'm really looking forward to the work that we all continue to do, and how we get a chance to reflect, hopefully in the future, on how this has changed the way we teach and the way that we engage ourselves and students in learning.
Thanks so much. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.